Welcome to the Cognitive Crucible, produced by the Information Professionals Association. Our website is information-professionals.org, where you can find links and information about today's conversation and get access to members-only content. Join John Bicknell and explore all aspects of our generational challenge, cognitive security. The Cognitive Crucible is a forum that presents different perspectives and emerging thought leadership related to the information environment. The opinions expressed by guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of or endorsement by the Information Professionals Association.
My guest today on the Cognitive Crucible is Brian Russell, who is an information advantage subject matter expert. And for Peraton, he works on cyber and information warfare projects, and he also founded Information Advantage Consulting, LLC. Brian Russell, welcome back to the Cognitive Crucible.
John, thanks for having me back. This might make it a hat trick, so to speak, maybe my third time back. I always enjoy our conversations. Hopefully our audience does too, and I'm looking forward to getting into some cyber topics.
Yes, excellent. And that's exactly right. This is your third time on the Cognitive Crucible. And I think that we're going to have, for 5-time guests, and you're not there yet, but it'll be like a, gold jacket club member or something like that. There have been no five-time guests. And actually between you, Brian, and Tom Kent, Tom Kent was just on for the third time just a couple of weeks ago. So you are in good company. And to our audience, we will most certainly have links to the previous episodes with Brian. So the conversation that I'd like to have with you today, Brian, will cover a recent article that you wrote for Keytrain Cyber. But the article is entitled "The Tie That Binds: Cyberspace as the Core of All Domain Maneuver Warfare." And of course, we will have a link to this as well in the show notes for those in our audience who would like to check it out. But before we get into this topic, Brian, could we start by getting your freshest take on your assessment of our strategic landscape, or if you prefer, the times in which we live?
Yeah, probably a mix of both, John. And if we jump straight to the lightning round, I'd describe it with one word called volatile. The world is moving fast. It's certainly technology is enabling a lot of that. And from a societal perspective, maybe an acceleration of the haves and have-nots. From a geopolitical perspective, how do nation states interact, behave with each other, resolve their conflicts? And again, everything is moving really, really fast, and maybe hard to figure out what exactly is going on. What is the truth of the matter? I heard you mention this in a recent podcast, the kernel of truth. How do you get to the kernel of truth of what's going on in today's world? And certainly that has security implications when you're trying to solve those problems. How do you approach those problems with an understanding of this volatility? But I think I want to flip the coin a little bit. We've talked about that before, John. There's two sides to the coins on this. I think there's a level of volatility, and I'll call it the friendly forces, so to speak. We take a lot of adversarial perspective, what's going on, but inside maybe U.S. Defense apparatus and the like, a lot of change going on to deal with that volatility. And just coming out of the Marine Corps fairly recently, a lot of your audience is probably familiar with the Marine Corps' force design efforts, trying to change the Marine Corps to adapt to the pacing threat, provide more value to combatant commanders. And there's this space that the Marine Corps is dealing with right now is, I've got real world mission in front of me now, but I'm also preparing for the future. And there's a little bit of risk in terms of removing some today capabilities to invest in and prepare for the future capabilities. And so leaders nowadays, in my view, operate in that space between. How do they identify where the gaps are, how to bring capabilities or organizations together to reduce that gap and really provide exponential value to their quote unquote customers? But really, like, how do you solve those problems by bringing all these disparate capabilities together? It's what I call the space between. That's what leaders today, to deal with this volatile environment, need to identify: the space between. Certainly gaps in the adversary system to exploit, but gaps in the friendly system to close and bring together, and always maintain kind of that relative view of both sides to really achieve in our audience, John, here,
Mhm.
information advantage or decision advantage. So that's what I think we're dealing with, John. Just a lot of volatility, and how do I package that very simply to help commanders make good decisions, or national security leaders make good decisions for dealing with that volatility.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And throughout your response there, I'm hearing, identifying, what the truth is, which uh, has always been an important part of like the unfolding, battle assessment. What's true, what's not, how am I potentially being deceived? But then feeding that into a better like modernized decision making apparatus and OODA looping it the whole time, and it really is a hard problem that not just militaries are grappling with today, but uh, commercial firms and just day-to-day people are having to grapple with all different shades or colors of this same problem. Would you say that that's generally on target?
Certainly, it's one of my recently adopted definitions of leadership is creating order out of chaos. And so part of the way you do that is describing the environment, a plan to engage with the environment and approach your end state and the like, and bringing your organization together, whether, again, like you said, military, civilian, doesn't matter. How do you describe that vision? How do you build a little bit of order in this volatile environment? That works across organizations, John. Absolutely agree with that idea.
So your article is curiously titled "The Tie That Binds." Why did you write this article?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Back to our opening discussion. I identified one of those spaces between that I think can be closed in the cyber domain, and it was a mix of recognizing an opportunity, a convergence of some things happening, and then a vision for how maybe we can close the gap for U.S. military forces in the cyber domain. Part of the opportunity I'll mention is just a convergence of a couple things, and convergence is a term that Lieutenant General Hawk, the presumptive next commander of U.S. Cyber Command, talked about a lot when he was in command of 16th Air Force. If the audience recalls, John, he unified the ISR and cyber tribes under 16th Air Force. Talked
Okay.
a lot about convergence. Hey, if we bring these capabilities together, they can do a lot more. And so, in that mind, I'm looking at a couple things happening fairly recently in U.S. Cyber Command. One is this idea of expeditionary cyberspace operations. And Paul Shu, who I call the head doctrinaire at U.S. Cyber Command, writes a pretty nice article about that in the summer's Cyber Defense Review. And basically describes, hey, the cyber mission force for projecting cyberspace power globally oftentimes can't reach all of their targets from their remote locations. And so we will have to deploy cyberspace capability, people, tools into the environment close physically to maybe gain access to those targets. And there's like a scant mention of expeditionary cyberspace ops in the latest joint publication 3TAC 12, but Paul does a pretty good description of the idea of it in the Cyber Defense Review. And so Brian Russell, former MEF Information Group commander with expeditionary cyber capability, becomes interested in that. How would my forces enable the cyber mission force or cyber command to maybe gain access to those targets in both ways? How can I enable cyber command? How could cyber command enable the fleet marine force? And so that is that space between, okay, Cyber Command moving out on this expeditionary cyberspace operations idea. There are expeditionary cyber forces in, I'll call it, the regular services. How do we close that space between? And it seems the other opportunity at play is Cyber Command is about to inherit enhanced acquisition authority. I know you just had a conversation with Bob Jones, Special Operations Command, much like Special Operations Command inherits forces and capabilities from the services and then applies SOCOM money on top of that to give it its special operations capability. Same idea. Services providing cyber capability to Cyber Command to employ. Cyber Command has some enhanced acquisition authority and budgetary control to enhance those capabilities. So my overall argument, John, is while we see this convergence of expeditionary cyber, let's tie those two forces together, cyber mission force and expeditionary cyber forces. As you build this new platform, let's have that in mind to really maximize the potential across the joint force in the cyber domain.
And the way you're unpacking that, it really does lend itself, straight into the concept of all domain maneuver warfare, which is the subtitle of your article. Do you think, by the way, Brian, you could send a link to that article that you just mentioned by your colleague there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. So your article begins with a story. Could you give this a recap, and are there any other examples of the kinds of things that you're talking about?
Yeah, it highlights that space between and part of this all domain maneuver, based out of the cyber domain is happening in some form or fashion across the joint force. I saw it when I was in command of the MEF information group, but it's mainly relational. It's not like structurally built either programmatically through systems or even command relationships per se. It's based on kind of who you know. And so that's what happened. We were in the midst of supporting Sixth Fleet, U.S. Navy Sixth Fleet, in EUCOM in the summer of 2021 with some information capabilities out of Camp Lejeune. So forward deployed over to Naples, helped Sixth Fleet for Exercise Seabreeze. Exercise Seabreeze was being conducted in the Black Sea with the Ukrainian Navy in
Okay.
advance of the latest conflict with Russia. Yes,
So
interesting.
so this is early 2021 then?
This is summer of 2021.
Summer of
So
20. Oh, okay, gotcha. Yeah. Okay.
summer 2021
Gotcha.
before, February
Of
22.
2022. I was off by a year. Okay. Yeah. Sorry about that.
But yeah, certainly everyone's attention is heightened, correct, John? Like they know there's
Yeah. Yeah.
conflict in the region, and basically, Sixth Fleet Commander wanted to quote unquote win the information fight with the Russians during this exercise. Typically, Sixth Fleet and partner forces would be, riddled with, disinformation in the information environment, and the narrative would kind of turn towards, either American or Ukrainian Navy incompetence, and Sixth Fleet Commander wanted to win that information fight. So we asked the MEF information group. We were reading the tea leaves on force design, John. The commandant said, "Hey, integration with the Navy is important." So, hey, I'm on board, right? 2 MIG, we're in. Here's some capabilities. Well, what happened in the midst of that exercise, a Russian affiliated disinformation actor allegedly hacked Ukrainian Ministry of Defense networks and got access to our Marines' personal information, some Marines that were forward deployed, their passport information. To gain access to Ukraine for the exercise, they had to submit all their information. Well, said actor posted that information publicly on a website. Haha,
And, th-
found stuff.
and this is not like an exercise vignette. This is in real life, right?
That's correct. That was
Okay. Okay.
that's the life of a MEF information group supporting an exercise, John. You fight real and you fight fake.
Okay. All
That's
right.
how I
Yeah.
describe it. This was definitely real. And so my ops chief at the time comes to me, "Hey, sir, here's what happened. This is in Camp Lejeune." I'm like, "Hey, we've got this, and it happened, and it's posted here halfway across the world on this, publicly hosted website." And he's like, "Hey, what? I've got an idea what we can do about this. Why don't we call headquarters Marine Corps and have the public affairs branch essentially contact the website company and say, hey, this actor is violating your terms of service. You need to pull that down from the website." And they did, John.
Hmm.
But like I like to describe to folks is that was the functional equivalent of an offensive cyberspace operation or a cyberspace attack. We destroyed that information on that website through a technique and mechanism. And again, that can happen through cyber means, but all of that happened relationally, John. My ops chief had a tour at Mar4 Cyber. He knew some people to talk to and call, and we happened to make it happen. The argument here is let's programmatically, systematically, technology-wise, let's build that capability within the joint force so we don't have to just rely on we happen to know someone. It's built into the system, and we can act with the agility and the speed commanders need. Again, Sixth Fleet Commander 1 win that information fight. We enabled him, but by happenstance. We should be a little more connected, particularly in the cyber domain, to outmaneuver an adversary. Think about that, John. Globally, we outmaneuvered in the cyber domain that adversary and enabled those Marines to continue their mission on the ground and not be, expelled from the country and, those type of things. So it was an all domain maneuver type of approach we took there. But again, just happenstance.
I see. I see. So you mentioned just a moment ago that this rapid response to take down this information could be thought of as a cyber offensive in a cyber offensive context, but this was really more of a defensive move in the context of this exercise. Is that right? Or am I not characterizing that right?
I'd characterize it as we were enabling the joint force to continue its mission in reaction to an adversary technique or capability. We were enabling the maneuver to continue, and we use the cyberspace domain to do it.
I see. Okay. Yeah. Cool. Are there any other examples that you want to call out?
I think one more that sticks in my mind from my time at the MEF Information Group is we were supporting cold response. This was in the early spring of 2022. There we are deploying Marine forces to Norway for a major exercise, just interoperability. This was certainly an exercise, John, but again, in the real cyber domain, malicious actors were trying to infiltrate our networks. Happens all the time. Cyber defenders know this. The network's constantly under attack. And so in this case, we actually picked up where the cyber attack was coming from. They were trying to infiltrate our networks, and we identified the source of it, and we called Cyber Command. Again, we had some relational connections there, no true command and control, and said, hey, can you essentially shoot back? Go after that actor and just shut them down, get them to pull off of our networks, outmaneuver them using the cyber domain. And we got, and as I described in the article, John, we got the cyber equivalent of a busy signal. Hey, cyber mission force, focus on other targets, don't have time to pull off target, service your target, so to speak. We've got some other things going on. Well, my view is from a capability and technology perspective, Cyber Command wants to be in a better place. Joe Noxoni, even some of his latest comments, talks about Cybercom 2.0, scale and speed and agility to rapidly service multiple targets in support of commanders' needs. And so, again, my view is let's build this new cyber platform to help the services and those regular forces compete in the cyberspace domain, maneuver in the cyberspace domain by giving them real capability. So the next time someone calls, there's an ability to rapidly shift over to a target and take action on it.
I see. So what are some of the ways that you have in your article that proposes solving some of these gaps?
Yeah, well, I think one is that general idea as Cyber Command goes to build out its what's referred to as the Joint Cyber Warfighting Architecture. It's essentially Cyber Command's warfighting platform. And just as a quick description for the audience, John, it is Cyber Command's approach to essentially unify the existing cyberspace capabilities into more of a unified capability. So what do I mean by that? So as Cyber Command developed, all of the services providing those service capabilities were providing their own cyber forces things to plan and conduct command and control on. They were providing cyber capabilities to train and rehearse the mission on. They were providing cyber capabilities to sense the environment. They were providing capabilities to project power into the cyberspace domain. JICWA, Joint Cyberspace Warfighting Architecture, is unifying all those service provided capabilities and then doing a level of unification across the command. And that's all right and proper. The cyber mission force needs that type of agility for sure. Hey, an Air Force cyber force detects an opportunity that's best serviced by an Army cyber part of the cyber mission force. Let's make it happen very, very quickly. This is a global fight. It's a global force. That all makes sense. My argument here is let's keep the services in mind who all have cyber equities. They literally operate in the cyber domain each and every day with their own networks or their own experiential cyber capabilities. Let's develop that platform to keep them in mind and make sure they can be connected and contribute to the fight, the analysis, the opportunities, or the cyber mission force can leverage forces, those expeditionary cyber forces out forward to help in the fight. That's the idea.
Yeah, for sure. And I again, I can see all of this like forming and evolving over time to do just what you were talking about at the very top, improving decision making and decision speed and integrating, this cyber capability in the ways that needs to happen for this competition that we find ourselves in right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a good segue into kind of the second piece of, how to make this capability a reality. And it's what I call making the platform inherently malleable
Mm.
or uh, change on the fly is a way to put it. My time in the MEF information group, I was astounded at times that I had Marines in my formation that were really good at coding, John. They could literally write scripts to make my platform, my systems work better, be more efficient, do more. This joint cyberspace warfighting architecture needs to have that same type of capability. We're evolving in my sense, John, in our acquisition pathways as the DoD. So much of our weapon systems are technology enabled. They're basically computers. They're almost a part of the cyber domain. We're evolving from the submit requirement, people evaluate requirement, they kick it to an organization to develop requirement gets fielded a couple years later, and then it's employed by the force. Back to where we started, volatile speed, get after it. We need systems that, yes, get you know sent to the force to use, but in stride, those operators can change the platform to do what they need to do. And Cyber Command is a great place to do that. It's literally part of the cyber mission force. Developers, software developers, can absolutely do this. As much as possible, build that into the system so the platform can be changed through time very rapidly in response to emerging mission requirements. And I think part of that I mentioned in the article is also kind of a talent management imperative.
Mm.
Brilliant Marines, like I mentioned in the MEF information group, brilliant service members up at Cyber Command, as easier as we can make their jobs and their lives to do the mission better, the better off you'll get a retention benefit, perhaps for those
Hmm.
individuals. And so, yeah, you've got the folks that know how to do it. Let's make the platform be able to change in stride to the emerging mission requirements.
Yeah.
I see is there's less developed, John, and maybe for future discussion, but the services are going down that road with the software factories. You
I,
know,
you know, I, I, I
um,
was just, I was just thinking about that. I couldn't recall exactly where I heard this before, but yeah, it's something in Austin, Texas, the Marine Corps just within the last 3 months or so, made some big announcement about some, military civilian collaboration along these lines. You're probably just getting ready to talk about it.
that's where I was going. Like all the services are moving and establishing these software factories to be responsive to operating forces requirements for their systems changing, so to speak, getting better. Hey, I've got the system this field is not quite doing this. Can you write some code, change something to make it do this? And that's that idea. And so I do see as the services move out on that, and you have Cyber Command doing very similar things in the software development realm, bringing those two things together is probably an opportunity for the joint force to really maximize the cyber domain. Again, from a friendly network perspective, operating out in the gray space, seeing the red space, that's all cyber. How do we make that connected as possible for our joint force, and making our platforms inherently malleable? I think is the way to get after that.
Is so when I use my smartphone, it has apps on it, right? And or even the uh, I've got an iPhone, so even the iOS, like every few weeks or a couple of months, these apps and the underlying software just go through an update process. Uh, some of them, I suppose, are security patches, which come out, not so much on a schedule, but like as needed. But then the other updates are scheduled. So these software factories that you were just describing, is would that be one of the goals? Would be to have the software that is used by DoD and the national security community, goes towards that kind of a model where user requested updates and feedbacks and security patches and all those kinds of things, happen, just kind of in the background, and users don't even it doesn't bother the user experience whatsoever, but just like all of a sudden one day, hey, presto, hey, here's this new feature that I've been requesting, awesome, and it just kind of happened. Is that one of the beneficial outputs of this kind of a model you're describing?
I think to borrow your analogy, there's probably three levels of application development. And so one would be, yeah, I'm that user and I have an app that is doing something. How do I quickly request the app to change to do something I need it to do, right? Just get that into the system and get some instantaneous feedback to develop the app. I think that's one thing. The second would be there is no app for this, and I need it really quick.
Ah,
Can you build me an app? To help me do that. And then the third is kind of like, varsity level. And what I'm trying to describe is let the Marine build the app him or herself
mm,
phone and put it right on there. And it has to be developed and tested. And, there's a security layer to that. All the cybersecurity professionals know that, but that talent exists. To do those type of things, and how do we build an architecture to have that happen very, very quickly is where I think we need to be headed. Because I'm going to date myself here, but this is our generation, John. Convoy 5 ton isn't working quite correctly. Bring it back to the shop, do the evaluation, fill out your product quality deficiency report, and submit that into the system, and you never hear from it again.
yeah, yeah.
We literally have Marine service members who can build the app and put it on the phone, today now, really, really quick. And how do we just enable that level of talent in, again, just regular force or the cyber mission force? That's the idea of this inherent malleability to our platforms.
Right. Um, where does AI come into this whole discussion space?
I think right on top of it, because AI can do some of those things I just described to make it faster, better, evaluate maybe the condition where you might need another development in the app or an app itself. So I think that's the third tier of my recommendation is I think because Cyber Command is chock full of really software smart folks, know how to code and developers, that they can almost serve as kind of like a DoD incubator for artificial intelligence work, so to speak. Really evaluate. I know General Hawk got asked about AI a lot in his congressional testimony a few months ago, as part of his nomination. And I think Cyber Command is a good place for that. If there is one place where you can trust to evaluate capabilities before they're deployed, it's certainly the culture there. It's the environment there to figure those things out. I think that is absolutely part and parcel to getting quicker to scaling capabilities for this cyber platform.
Right. Well, this is all clearly a evolving and like forward-looking aspirational end state. But are there any bright spots, any exemplars within either our national security community or within our allied partner community of places that are like on the right path as pursuing these kinds of capabilities?
Well, I think that brings up an important point because you'll hear General Nakasone and General Hawk talk about the importance of partnerships as part of their strategy. So whatever, gets developed in the platform, I think you need to keep allies in mind first and foremost. Again, that would just be a leveraging of their capability. And I think immediately of the Five Eyes relationships, UK and Australia, and there's a recent article about, developing AI with those strategic allies. They have very similar capabilities, maybe not at the scale of the United States when it comes to cyber and cyber command, but certainly very innovative, certainly the same level of type of capability. And so they should be integrated in this effort right away. So that's a great question. I think you absolutely need to go there. I would say we definitely need to pay attention to the current crucibles, what's going on in Ukraine. Incredibly informative on how they prepared themselves for a level of cyber resiliency during the initial, invasion, early 2022, Russia coming across the border, and significant amount of cyber effort on Russia's part to shut down Ukraine. And a lot of that didn't happen. You'll see a lot of articles, the cyber war that didn't happen. I think that's because Ukraine has a level of technical integration within their, not just the military forces, but their civil society as well, that really enabled them to be cyber resilient. And then what you see in terms of their battlefield innovation with small technology and the like is pretty impressive. So you need to pay attention to that. And certainly mention here, John, and share the link with you. P.W. Singer and Emerson T. Brooking have it's an article in Foreign Affairs called Gaza and the Future of Information War, about what's going on in that current conflict, and they describe that. Those are the authors of Like War. Your audience will be very
Yeah.
familiar with that. And they mentioned in this article about if cyber war is the technical hacking of machines, like war is kind of the hacking of the human mind. I would just offer that it's both in this day and age. How do you do both of these capabilities, the technical and the cognitive? That's really what you're looking to achieve. And again, back to Cyber Command, you'll hear General Knoxoni and General Hawk talk a lot about information operations, or doing the influence through a cyber capability. Very, very important to the command. So I think the JICWA, Joint Cyber Warfighting Architecture, can be built along those lines, paying attention to the current crucibles around the world of how you influence through the cyber domain. I think that's very important to do. And then I guess the last one, John, I would add to the question is,
Mhm.
which industry partners are getting it right, because of pace of technology, and industry is typically the ones that's going to develop and lead, so to speak, and in the new and the fresh and the like. Which industry partners have the right mix of technical and operational experience? Again, acquisition community probably needs to do a little bit of a refresh in terms of, I'd call it the DevSecOps approach to acquisition, John. Like, how do you really get acquisition professionals focused on mission outcomes? Well, you do that by bringing the operators together as part of the development process and doing that together. And then, what are the industry leaders that recognize the technical and cognitive aspects of this fight, of this information fight? There's a little bit of a space between in some groups that really, really good technical, really, really good cognitive. You got to have both in this day and age. So yeah, where in industry do you find that good mix of, hey, I can work with the government, or I can work with Cyber Command because I know the mission, and then I can bring you both capabilities, cognitive and technical.
All right. Wow. Excellent. Well, so perhaps we can do a quick lightning round, Brian, and then close it out in typical fashion. So lightning round, I don't know, 30, 60 seconds per response, something like that. So
I
sound
love me
good?
some I love me some lightning round.
All right, let's do it. All right. So this came out of your article as well. You talked about the tactical edge.
Okay, so I think I would go back to all domain maneuver, and this idea of that also means all domain reconnaissance. So it's a big C5 ISRT fight. You got to find targets in order to engage targets. From a cyber perspective, how can the tactical edge enable the cyber mission force to find those targets, and vice versa? Once they're found, how can the cyber mission force enable that tactical edge to engage those targets? That's part of the whole idea here, is we've got a forward deployed, globally dispersed joint force operating in the cyber domain every day. How do we enable that through some pretty impressive capabilities being built for U.S. Cyber Command?
Okay, excellent. And also within your article, I pulled out a phrase, pennies on the dollar.
Well, here's an idea, John. So in order to recon the target, you need to access the target. And there's a lot of time spent mental energy wise and planning wise of access to environments, right? It's the area denial, anti-access fight and challenge. Like, how do I get into target space? And certainly as a Marine, this idea of a stand-in force, of already being there, don't have to fight to get access. But think of the billions of dollars we spend in the United States, John, to get access to targets, carrier battle groups, forward deployed, you know, squadrons employed on them, the whole battle group and the money spent to forward deploy them and pay for those people. Well, from a cyber domain perspective, I just talked about how you generate access to targets. You layer on AI, you get smart service members know how to code, and we'll build multiple pathways and multiple weapons to gain access and then affect those targets. So it seems to me that's a pennies on the dollar, economy of savings from a cyber maneuver perspective, vice the other more traditional physical domains.
Right, right. And also, yeah, back to a point you made previously, the opposite side of that coin is that for our adversaries and maybe especially like non-state actors, just like a smart kid, somewhere in the world that, has a talent for these kinds of activities can wreak havoc for pennies on the dollar. And our multi-billion-dollar spends on the kinds of capabilities you were just describing um, are important, but it doesn't necessarily go towards countering these kinds of challenges that we're experiencing.
Yeah, particularly in the competition phase, so to speak, right? The
Mm.
campaigning, the persistent, that's absolutely in Cyber Command strategy, persistent engagement. Well, heck, again, globally dispersed, forward deployed joint force, let's enable them to persistently engage in the cyber domain and generate some access to those targets.
Yeah, yeah. Last lightning round. This is revisiting a previous point as well, but could you give another beat on civil military fusion?
Yeah, I think mentioned that in the Ukraine model, how there's probably a tighter integration than we enjoy here in the United States, and there's probably some civic aspects of that, our Constitution and the like, all right and proper. But I would, coming out of the MEF information group, kind of I always question, like, could I get a real cyber auxiliary? And what I meant by that, the Marine Corps went forward with an idea of a cyber auxiliary. So these are civilians, perhaps former Marines in the cybersecurity field or cyber industry that would come in and give my cyber Marines, John, some training, the
Mm,
latest techniques for cybersecurity and the like. And that's great and certainly valued it. But there's a lot of folks willing to help. And what would a cyber auxiliary look like that identifies those targets for me? And
mm,
flips that into the system. Hey, I've found this. It's almost like a vulnerability disclosure program type of thing, that
mm.
some of the services are going down range with. But even back to maybe more cognitive perspective, got a former gunnery sergeant work for me in the MEF information group. Jeremy Kofsky just retired, a human. Marine by background, John wrote an interesting article called essentially modern day coast watchers. There's a whole host
Ah,
of call them naval enthusiasts that sit off the coast of said territory and just watch ships come on by. Like, hey, I just saw the Russian cruiser so and so leave port or whatever. Well, how do we leverage that? It's essentially for free.
ah.
That's a true cyber informational auxiliary. Like, how do we enable that a little bit more for our own uses?
Or like the ham radio community. Um, I also I I live on a railroad track, and something else that I mean this is a completely unrelated, so it's related, but a bit of a sidebar. But there's also like a train spotting community of people who watch for trains and actually have like a almost like bingo cards of various different like locomotives and spotting various different engines and stuff like that. But anyway, to your point, somehow like crowdsourcing an aspect of cybersecurity.
Yep, that's the idea. And yeah, trains, planes, and automobiles.
There you go.
John,
Hey,
there's a
hey,
whole
hey,
community out there looking for all of them. Yep.
right, and since this is coming out during the holiday season, a perfect holiday movie for those of you unfamiliar. So this is a 1980s movie with Steve Martin and John Candy.
Yep.
If you've not seen the movie, it's a real hoot, and I'll put a link in the show notes to go check it out if you're unfamiliar with it. All right, well, this has been fantastic as usual, Brian. So closing out, do you have a research question that an interested student might take a crack at that might be related to these kinds of topics?
Yeah, and I'd like to do call it a cross podcast collaboration on this one. So
Excellent.
our friends over the Phoenix Cast, John, you've had them on, and
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Love it.
they're great, and they're on kind of the mandatory listen list for me for sure. But they had an episode back in September called Cyber Fires, with Colonel Jacob Pitaro and Jack Schweitzer. And Jake at the time was Deputy J38, so the Fires and Effects Division at U.S. Cyber Command. And Jack Schweitzer worked for him. And Jack worked for me back when I was in the J38 in that same billet. And they had a conversation. So if anyone's talking cyber fires in the public domain, one, it automatically goes on the listen list, right? There's not a lot of talk about those things in the public sphere. So it caught my interest, one, because I was in the mission and kind of wanted to hear what they had to say. But they asked Jack a pretty interesting question. You know, how would you describe the mission of the J38? Again, that's the Fires and Effects division of U.S. Cyber Command. And Jack's first response was manage risk, not like how to develop targets and produce capabilities to affect targets, but it was the manage risk. And that's very telling, John. And that is a part of the job there. Like we described, part of the challenge with offensive cyber, when you have singular capabilities, if you use it, it's gone. Once it's discovered, everyone updates their stuff, and then it's no longer a cyber weapon for you. And also, operating offensively in the cyber domain puts cyber forces, at least virtually, into sovereign territory. So it's a political risk decision, John. That's why some of those capabilities, the authorities for them are withheld at a pretty high level. Those are all right and proper reasons. So it's a long way of getting to, how do we better assess both the effectiveness of cyber weapons and the risk of employing them in terms of their loss or proliferation and the like. So commanders can come away with informed decisions on their use. So we talk Cybercom 2.0 and JICWA and scaled capabilities and a ton of them. Well, commanders still need to make decisions at the end of the day. So how do we better inform one, effectiveness of said capabilities, but also the risk of employing them so they can do that at the time needed? When crisis happens, John, national security leaders expect, hey, what do you have? What can you do for me? And it's all sometimes about a risk decision on their part. So just, one more, I'll send you the link to it. But kind of what got me thinking about that the latest cyber defense review, an article by Dr. Christopher Whyte called Beyond Bigger, Faster, Better, Assessing Thinking About Artificial Intelligence and Cyber Conflict. Really good article that gets to these type of points. As everyone talks bigger, better, faster, more, but when AI starts fighting AI, what does that look like? How do you really inform decisions when you have those systems fighting each other almost? And so, yeah, that's what I throw on the table to help us assess, John.
Okay, dynamite. Well, we'll have links to both of those resources so that an interested student can use them to help research that a little bit more. Okay, finally, a book suggestion, either related to the kinds of things we've been discussing, or it could just be something that's on Brian Russell's nightstand currently.
So I'll go with the on my nightstand currently because I'm only a few chapters in, but that tells you at least why I think it's such a great book. I'm just a few chapters in, and it's phenomenal. And it's Wiring the Winning Organization by Gene Kin and Steven Spear. And it's essentially comes out of the DevSecOps world of how really effective organizations get after producing these capabilities and value very, very quickly and very, very well. And I'll just mention the three pillars of what they believe effective organizations do really, really well. They slowify, they simplify, and they amplify. And what they mean by that, John, is they take the time to understand the problem they're dealing with, and they can do that kind of cross-functional team-wise. Do we have an understanding? Can we slow down enough to really understand what we're dealing with? Then they simplify to enable those teams to get after solving the problem. They break it down into the most simplest kind of elements to get after it. And then I think the key, back to the spaces between, the
Mhm.
amplification is really how do problems or challenges get amplified within the organization so the right talent from across that organization can be applied to solve it. And again, we deal in some, stovepiped or, different elements of the organization that rarely interact with each other, but the problem to that challenge might be in another element of the organization. So how do effective organizations amplify problems where the expertise can be brought together to quickly solve them? So yeah, I'm only a few chapters in, but seems like a really great read for what we started with, John, the space between. What do leaders need to do to deal with this volatile environment of ours? They need to recognize where gaps are and help their organizations come together to close those gaps.
All right, excellent book suggestion. We will have links to as many of these resources as we can in the show notes. And with that, Ryan Russell, thank you so much for being a guest on the Cognitive Crucible.
John, thanks so much for having me back, and for you and everyone in IPA. Have a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and Happy New Year.
The Cognitive Crucible is the only podcast dedicated to increasing interdisciplinary collaboration between information operations practitioners, scholars, and policymakers. To find out more about the Information Professionals Association, visit us at information-professionals.org. Please support our podcast by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review.